I wake up every day in silence that doesn't heal, but sharpens. My house is on the outskirts of the town, where the streets empty earlier than in the center, and even the dogs bark reluctantly. The brick has faded, the paint on the fence is peeling, the windows silently look into space. This is my home, although I haven't felt it as my own for a long time. Here I am like a lodger within myself. Once upon a time, voices rang out in these rooms, the smell of fresh bread spread, and people argued, laughed, and consulted at the table. I was the one they came to for a decision, the one they looked back at with respect. Now my children rarely cross this threshold. They are busy, business, travel, meetings. They live brightly, loudly, and I live quietly, in the shade. They say, "Dad, rest, enjoy your old age." And there is no malice in their voice, only indifference. It is worse than hatred. Grandchildren. They don't look me in the eye. Only short visits, forced gifts for the holidays. Their fingers always grip their phones tighter than my hand. They are annoyed by my slowness, my need to tell a story, my pauses. To them, I am an obstacle to the rhythm. An old man who thinks too much and is silent for too long. In the store, I become invisible. The young cashier looks through me as if I were transparent. In the hospital, the doctor listens not to me, but to his own watch. He nods, writes a few words on a card, but his gaze has long been on the corridor, where others are waiting. I feel the circle of indifference in which I find myself shrinking with each passing day. People pass me by as if they were passing a bench or a lamppost. Every day I perform the same rituals. In the morning I make myself a modest breakfast, brew tea that seems tasteless, no matter what kind I buy. I turn on the radio, there are other people's voices, news about other people's successes, about disasters that are happening somewhere far away. I listen and feel that my life is no longer woven into the fabric of the world. It's as if I no longer exist. But there is one thing that doesn't let me disappear completely. Something is scratching inside me, quietly, invisible to others. It's a sense of injustice. I gave my life to these people, this country, this family. I built, took risks, protected. I was the one who held everything on my shoulders. And now my word is not worth even a minute of someone else's attention. This is not just an insult, it's rotting from within. I hear my thoughts getting heavier, how the darkness inside me is looking for a way out. I often sit by the window and look at the road. Strangers pass by, young, hasty, strangers. They don't even notice my eyes. I think, what if they knew who I really am? What if they saw not an old shadow, but a person who once decided destinies? This thought makes me feel warmer, but not for long. Then the cold returns, the realization that I am no one to them now. Sometimes I dream of voices from the past, how I stand in front of people, how they listen to me, how they wait for my words. I wake up with a feeling of strength, but it disappears as soon as I try to get out of bed, feeling the burden of old age. And then despair sets in. This indifference of society, family, even those I loved the most, gradually turns into something else. Into a dark rage that awakens in me. They do not yet know that in silence something stronger than a scream is born. They think I'm old and defenseless. But it's just a shell. There's still steel inside me. And one day it will cut through this silence. I sit in my old chair, which has long since lost its elasticity, and I understand, my greatest enemy is not loneliness, but memories. They come quietly, like thieves in the night, and pull me out of the present, throwing me into the times when I was still someone. I see myself young. My arms are strong, my shoulders are straight, my voice sounds so that people freeze. I remember how it all began, a small office, where besides me there were only a few like-minded people. Old desks, a typewriter, folders with bills that I carried in my hands, because there were no couriers. I stayed up at night, counting pennies, risking everything, but I believed that I could. And I did. My business grew like a tree planted in fertile soil. Every deal, every victory was a brick in the foundation of my name. I was not only a leader, I was a symbol of reliability. People came to me because they knew that my word was stronger than a contract. I never betrayed, and that was what made me strong. My family was there. I picked up my children when I still smelled of construction dust and cheap tobacco from sleepless nights. I took them to school, I taught them to look people in the eye. I said, honor is what remains when money and fame are gone. They listened, or maybe they just pretended to listen. But then it seemed to me that I was leaving them the greatest treasure. I remember losing friends in the struggle. Someone couldn't keep up, someone fell from temptation. But I kept going, even when curses and whispers could be heard behind my back. I was tough, but fair. I knew that the world was built not on mercy, but on strength. And the strength was in me. Today I remember those times and feel empty. The children for whom I gave myself now speak of me as a burden. For them, I am not a symbol of honor, but an unnecessary burden. In their eyes, I am not the one who once lifted them from their knees, but an old man who finds it difficult to tie his shoelaces. They have forgotten that their comfort was bought by my sweat and sleepless nights. I look at my hands, once strong, now covered with spots and wrinkles. But memory does not allow me to forget who I was. It torments me with contrast. In my thoughts I stand, majestic and unshakable, and in the mirror I see only a shadow. And it is this contrast that tears me apart from the inside. I remember conversations with partners when my decisions determined the fate of dozens of people. I remember the looks of those who trusted me. They all believed that I was a wall behind which they could hide from the storm. And I really was that wall. And now I've been pushed aside, like an old brick that has lost its strength. And what hurts the most is not old age itself, but indifference. I was ready to accept weakness, fatigue, even loneliness. But I wasn't ready to go unnoticed. Forgotten. For them, it's as if I've already died, remaining physically present in this house. This humiliation is worse than any illness. Memories cut, but at the same time they remind me, I was strong. And strength is not a ghost. It can return. Maybe in a different form, but it's still in me. Because someone who once rose from nothing always remembers how to do it. And then I start to think, maybe my past is not just torment. Maybe it's a weapon. My experience, my connections, my knowledge of human weaknesses. All this sleeps like coals under ashes. And all it takes is a little air to ignite the fire. I have always believed that the biggest blows are dealt not in war or business, but at home, among my own people. The enemy hits you in the forehead, and you see his face. And the indifference of relatives sharpens you, like rust, imperceptibly but mercilessly. The first time I felt this especially acutely was when I asked my son to help fix the roof. The rain was leaking into the bedroom. I was afraid that the beams would completely rot. I called him, listened to the beeps for a long time, finally heard his voice, tired, irritated. He said that he had a meeting, that he didn't have time for trifles, and advised me to call a repairman. I was silent, listening to his rapid words and understood. I was no longer the father to whom people once ran for advice. I was a little thing, a problem that interfered with his plans. I hung up the phone and for the first time felt how cold it got even in a warm room. Grandchildren. The oldest, the one who used to sit on my lap and listen to fairy tales, now looks through me as if through a dirty window. Once I tried to joke at the table, to recall a story from my young life. He rolled his eyes and grumbled, "Grandpa, you're talking about the old days again. We're not interested." Those words rang deeper than a knife. I silently put down my fork, swallowed the insult along with the cold soup, and realized, there was no place for me in their world. For them, I was an extra voice, a noise that needed to be turned off. They greeted me in the hospital the same way. I sat in line for hours, my back ached, my legs trembled. When I finally got to the office, the doctor, a young man with a confident look, looked at me as if he saw a statistic in front of him, not a person. He quickly asked a few questions, didn't listen to the answers, prescribed pills, and waved his hand. I wanted to say that the pain in my heart was not from pills, but from indifference. But the words got stuck. Because who needs me with my truths? I returned home and opened my old notebook. I took out a pen that had long since dried up and made it right again. I wrote, Dr. March 14th. Indifferent. That evening, I started taking notes for the first time. Not complaints, facts. Names, dates, small details. Coldly, without emotion. The way I used to keep business journals. Because I understood, every humiliation is a small death, and if I don't count them, they will erase me completely. The notebook gradually filled up. There were my children, grandchildren, neighbors, a doctor, even a store cashier who turned away when I dropped the coins. I began to see a pattern. Indifference is the universal language of modern people. It has become their habit. And I am their victim. But another feeling woke up in me. I wasn't just suffering anymore. I was observing. I was analyzing. I was putting together the puzzles. Each humiliation became a piece of the puzzle. And the more of them there were, the clearer the picture became. The picture of a world where I was written off. But they didn't know that I knew how to turn weakness into strength. I'd been doing it for decades in the business. And now, as they try to push me into the shadows, I'm starting to get used to this darkness. Because that's where I can prepare. They laugh, ignore, humiliate. And I write. I remember. Sometimes I read my notes and feel a strange pleasure. As if I'm no longer helpless. As if every word they say, every insult they throw isn't a defeat and the evidence is in the case. I'm no longer just a grandfather forgotten on the side of the road. I'm a witness. And one day I'll be a judge. That day I went out into the city with 2 heavy bags. Inside were a few groceries, nothing special, bread, some cereal, milk. But for my hands it was a burden that became heavier with each step. I walked slowly, holding on to the bags as if they were the last support in this world. People walked past me, hurried, busy, strangers. I tripped over a bump in the sidewalk. The bags fell out of my hands, the milk crashed onto the asphalt, the white liquid spilled out, mixing with the dirty water. I bent down, trying to pick up at least something, and then I looked up. There was a group of teenagers standing in front of me. They were watching, laughing. One of them said, "Grandpa, it's your own fault. Why did you leave the house if you can't deliver?" Their laughter hit me harder than the fall. It echoed around me, echoing off the walls of the houses, cutting the air. I reached out, trying to stop the guy, to ask him to pick up the bread. He recoiled as if I were possessed by the plague, and laughed even louder. The others joined in. I felt my face burn with shame. The people at the bus stop watched the scene, but no one came forward. No one. My vision blurred. I stood in the middle of the street, drenched in someone else's laughter, with trembling hands and a broken package. At that moment, I heard something inside me. It was not a thought or a word. It was a bell. The same one that had once called me to battle when it was necessary to defend business or honor. The bell awakened something old and dark. I slowly stood up. The laughter was still ringing, but I could no longer hear it. A silence was growing inside me. Cold, sharp. In this silence, I suddenly understood, I was no longer a victim. There would be no more humiliations to which I would respond with silence. Now I would create this silence myself, and it would become a trap for those who had once laughed. I gathered up the bread, put it back in the bag, and left. People stepped out of the way, some still cast sidelong glances, but I didn't care. Because a decision was born in me. From that moment on, I stopped being an old, forgotten grandfather. I became a player. And this game would be mine. When I returned home, the rooms no longer seemed empty. They were filled with my new breath. The walls no longer pressed, they listened. I felt that everything in this house was becoming a witness to my transformation. I sat down at the table, opened my notebook, and stared at the list of names for a long time. Each of them was now not just a memory, but a target. I felt a cold certainty, they would all pay. Not with a shout, not with a fist, no. That would be too easy and primitive. I would take away from them what was most precious, peace. I will make them see themselves as I see them, indifferent, cruel, ridiculous in their confidence. I sat in the dark for a long time, without turning on the light. And in this darkness I felt good. Because for the first time in many years I felt not loneliness, but strength. They are still laughing. They do not yet know that the old wolf has woken up. But very soon their smiles will disappear. And then they will remember me. And none of them will be able to pass by me anymore, as if I were a shadow. After that scene on the street, I never woke up the same again. I looked in the mirror and saw not an old man with trembling hands, but the cold silhouette of a man who knew, there was a game ahead. And there would be no coincidences in this game. I opened my notebook again. Names, dates, details. Some would call it a senile whim, but I saw in it a map of future actions. Each line was a thread that I could pull, and a whole tangle of human lives would begin to tangle. I had always known people's weaknesses. Now I would use this knowledge again. I renewed contacts that no one had suspected. Old partners, former competitors, even a few people from the past with whom I had been connected by darker matters than business. They were surprised by my call, but there was respect in their voices. Because I was Ralf. And even old age had not erased my reputation from their memory. I was not going to hit straight. True revenge is not shouting or fighting. It is silence that gradually turns into chaos in the minds of others. I started with small things. The doctor who had dismissed me suddenly received a check from the commission. His colleagues began to whisper that he was negligent in his treatment of patients. He had to make excuses, and I knew that he remembered the day he had neglected me. My grandson, who had once ridiculed my stories, found himself in a situation where his little secret became known to his parents. I had only directed a few words into the right ear, and now he had to look them in the eye. He had no idea that I was behind it. But his arrogance crumbled when he realized that even youth can be fragile. Children. They had long been accustomed to living their own lives, each in the certainty that I was helpless. I pushed their foreheads together. I hinted to one about the other's debts, to the other about the first's possible betrayals. A few phone calls, a few unobtrusive words, and a fire of suspicion was lit between them. Now their dinners were no longer warm, they argued, doubted, lost trust. I sat in my chair and listened to their harmony crack. Everything seemed accidental. But I knew, this was my hand. Like a chess player, I moved the pieces. And each game brought me closer to the main thing, to the fact that they felt what it was like when your life falls apart and no one reaches out. And society? It also felt my presence. The cashier who had once turned away lost her job because of errors at the cash register. Errors that I knew how to show in a way that no one doubted. She had no idea that the old man who had once dropped coins in front of her now held her fate in his hands. I remained in the shadows. No one saw me in action. But I saw their eyes, confused, scared, broken. And then I felt that my life had meaning again. I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking for balance. And I found it in their fear. I wasn't destroying them physically. I was breaking their self-confidence. And that was much sweeter. Because now they felt what I had felt for years, powerlessness, confusion, pain. I made them look in the mirror and see not the heroes of their own stories, but those who had betrayed the one who raised them. My house became quiet, but it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for his next prey. And I knew, this game wouldn't end until everyone who had hurt me had their share. They did not applaud. No one went to the threshold with flowers, said thank you, and did not apologize. Revenge rarely comes in the form of a reward. It is like a cold rain that slowly washes dust from the facade, leaving behind a different picture, naked, unadorned, but true. I watched their lives crumble into many tiny cracks that flicked under the lamps of evening news and looked like an accident. The people around you began to look at me differently, not through me, but straight into the eyes. There was no sympathy, and there was no joy. There were respect and fear. My children argued aloud without thinking that their beating hearts were an echo of what they had done with me years earlier. I heard their voices through thin walls, heard each breath, every pause filled with reproaches of conscience. The grandchildren no longer hurried to escape from me, someone once called, and the voice at that end listened to my heart as a reminder. Not all of them broke. Some lifted their heads, looked through other eyes and saw exactly what I wanted to achieve, reflecting my own cruelty. Society has learned to keep the distance. The people who once turned their eyes away now leaned when I was passing, or just silently turned away with respect. Their views became different, now they had a memory that old age could turn into force. And although I was not looking for worship, it became clear to me, respect is not a gift, it should be deserved. They deserved a lesson, though bitter. I have not turned into a monster. I did not rush to destroy their lives to the ruins, did not destroy homes, did not break the bones. I just gave them what they gave me, anxiety, inconvenience, inability to leave my trace in the past as invisibility. I made them feel what it means to be dropped on the sidelines, and it was the most well-paid. My art is not in destruction, but in opening. I discovered them a mirror, and it showed not their victories, but their cold indifference. Every action, every hint, every voice in the right ear, all this was part of my game. I went quietly like a shadow on the floor, and then it appeared in their thoughts, as if uninvited memories. And when they were looking for the cause of their fall, they did not find it in obvious. Life worked as a chain of minor coincidences, but I knew, the order in chaos was my gift. And strangely, another thing was returned with revenge, long buried, dignity. She is not in applause, not in words, but in the internal statement that I have the right to respect. My heart ceased to want rage. It wanted to close the circle. I was not looking for destruction, I wanted to restore balance. If they forgot about humanity, I reminded them of the most free way that he had at his disposal. Lying in the evening in the dark, I write down the last lines in my diary. Hands are no longer so accurate. Subscribe and like, and send the video to your friends.